and yeah, and so you're part of my lineage of teachers, and I hope I hope it's okay to say well done. I hope it's true that it's really because um, everybody had a different impact on me in terms of lineage, and it's always interesting to see how different teachers impact one, and whether it was, especially my first retreat, I was working with Joseph Goldstein, and actually, and who else? Not Anna Douglas. I can't. Oh, Carol Wilson. And Carrie, yeah, and it was. Oh no, that wasn't the one you were on. Yeah, but but all of them have had an impact on me that is really heartfelt and meaningful. But Joseph, especially on that first retreat, because I had a really hard retreat, and I've told this group before, and I'm going through the days waiting for them to ring the bell at every sit, like just because I was in pain and uncomfortable and couldn't do it. And finally, at about the sixth or seventh day, I just vowed to sit still and not move, and it hurt like hell, and it hurt, but I stayed still, for the early morning sitting for 45 minutes or an hour, and it was everything hurt, everything was killing me, and then the bell rang, and the pain went away, and my knee went away, and I went away, and I couldn't stop being mindful, and it was changed my whole life. And later that day, when I talked to Joseph, and I said to him in my total innocence, and with this kind of voice, I said, "Am I going to be like this forever?" And he laughed and said, "No, no, you things will change, but I want you to come on the 3-month course." That was the first thing he said. So anyhow, and I think you've done a few of the 3-month courses.
Yes, I have. One moment, I've got to drink a little water.
Sure, I'll drink with you.
I also, even though my first retreats were with Ram Dass and Stephen Levine, where Stephen Levine introduced me to insight meditation. And I guess I'll tell a little bit of that story because
Please.
I was at what was called a mature ashram with Ram Dass in the mountains of New Mexico. And he brought along 2 meditation teachers. One of them taught guided imagery, climb a golden ladder and meet your spirit guides or whatever. And that was interesting. But the other one was Stephen Levine, and he invited everyone to just pay attention to their mind. And I had never paid attention to my mind. I'd never made that shift from being just carried along by the stream of consciousness to noticing it. And that just that shift alone, I think it's the most liberating shift there is, from relating from our mind to relating to our mind. And that was huge. And yeah, it became so fascinating that drew me in so much that I didn't want to stop. Another thing at that same retreat that drew me in, that made me not want to stop, is that I noticed I was in a beautiful, pristine mountain environment, and it couldn't have been more silent. And my mind was incredibly noisy. And the contrast between my mind stream and the outer environment was so severe that I knew that I was we'll put in a more casual sense, not in a technical sense, but in a casual sense, I was mentally ill, which I think all of us are to a certain degree until we've worked with our mind. And that inspired me so much to work with my own craziness, that led me to my next 2 14-day retreats with Joseph Goldstein, where I cried my eyes out when I heard the first teaching of the Four Noble Truths. It felt like I was home. I felt so happy that someone was saying it as it is. And one thing led to another from there. So Joseph is definitely my root teacher, the one that really opened my heart. But Stephen was also an inspiration.
Beautiful. Yeah, really beautiful and fun to hear. You know, because I know little bits of your background, but not everything. And it's, for me, it's also interesting when I think about lineage, like who touched us, like who touched them also becomes part of the lineage, you know, and because, you know, like Jack and Joseph had really a huge impact on me. And when I say Jack, Jack Cornfield, if anybody doesn't know Jack, and Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg, and they practiced a lot with different people, and especially Jack with Ajahn Chah. I feel like, oh, Ajahn Chah's in the room, you know,
No
and
doubt.
and and of, you know, of the highest order of Zen masters, who wasn't a Zen master, but he was a Zen master, and Mahasi Sayadaw also, and just that kind of fierce, clear, this moment, you know, breath, and then keep going. And yeah, and for myself, then I also think of other teachers in Buddhism, especially in the Theravada, that have impacted me. Because when I think of Ajahn Chah, then I think of his lineage and Ajahn Mun, or the different people who I've met and worked with over the years, like Ajahn Jumnian, who is totally fun to practice with, and also, you know, Sayadaw U Tejaniya, of the different streams, and you know, and just, and everybody's part of the lineage that's here right now, which is me.
No, that's why you're a treasure to your Sangha, is because you carry the living expression of all of those lineages, all those teachers, and it shouldn't be ever taken for granted, as far as I'm concerned, that, you know, the fact that you carry that and all that practice and yeah,
Yeah,
it
I think of
really
it a
blessed.
little, I think of it a little different. It's lovely what you're saying, but I think of it as like, oh, they're carrying me here, and that's and it's just, I'm just a voice for something much bigger, which I know you know, but it's part of what lineage means ultimately to me.
Yeah. I think it's also really interesting to see what of those teachers that carry you or you carry, what
Uh,
of those teachers really gets transmitted, what gets passed along. And so, for
yeah.
example, when, you know, in sitting in the Theravada tradition, the tradition of Mahasi Sayadaw, the Mahasi Sayadaw tradition of Theravada, I sat many long practice periods and practiced in Burma 4 years with, didn't practice in Burma for 4 years, but 4 years with U Pandita Sayadaw, who many of
Yeah.
you have heard of, many of you haven't heard of. But uh, Sayadaw U Pandita was this very fierce kind of guy, and he was considered the master of Stone Age psychology, because he would use the he would play you. He would see your character type, and with me, he thought there was a little too much pride, and so he would just butter me up and tell me what a wonderful person I was, what a wonderful yogi. How nobody was getting it like me. And then as soon as he had me, then he would act like I was the biggest idiot that ever walked in the room, and it showed me so much, how 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 praise and blame can affect my consciousness, and that was a huge impact. But his most important teaching, when he was when he was trying to tease out, as you said earlier, just this moment,
Mhm.
part of his practice was to report exactly what you noticed. And he just wanted the facts, like in Dragnet for all of you older folks here, just the facts. And I would go in and I would report, I noticed this, I noted it, and this is what happened to it. And I would describe as clearly as I could exactly what was happening. but somehow I would slip into a little bit of embellishment. It felt like this, I started to get into my own personality around it. And one day I was feeling the pain of the what's called sankhara dukkha, the pain of life. Every sense door was being impinged upon, and I just wanted it all to stop. And I didn't realize it, but I was busy understanding dukkha, busy understanding suffering. And I went in and I made my description, and I was kind of feeling proud that I had felt like I was dragging my body around. And he looked at me and he said, just see dukkha as dukkha. And it kind of woke me up, and I realized, oh, there's such a difference between just what's happening and the embellishment that my mind adds to it. And ever since then, my radar for any elaboration on what's going on when somebody's trying to tell me, it's usually story, and it's often not just basically 6 experiences: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. So that kind of thing gets passed on to person to person to person all these years. There's more, in that little bag.
Well, it's beautiful because Upandita, who I'd never practiced with, partly because I heard he was the least user-friendly teacher that anybody knew. He was a tough guy.
Yeah.
And he wasn't telling stories like Jack Cornfield or anything like that. It was a different style of teaching, and fierce.
Yeah.
And also, I love hearing how it woke you up.
Yeah.
And because I know you didn't stop there either, right?
Well, it was actually his toughness and my aversive reaction to his Stone Age psychology style. I shouldn't say it in public, but maybe I should. But anyway, it was my reaction to that made me actually begin to feel some diminishment of faith in his methodology and his form, and it opened me to finding teachings in other flavors and other forms.
Yeah, and I think that's really important for people to work with what really allows them to open or learn or understand or deepen, and then also to know when it's time to wait, maybe there's something more somewhere, that it might not all be in one person or one method or one system. And that's really important for all of us to become our own teachers at some point in that way. So, and I just was, in my thinking about it, I was thinking about there were other Buddhist traditions that I know you've been involved with. Could you say a little bit about the other lineages in Buddhism you've been involved with?
Sure. I've done a little bit of, I've done a couple Zen Sesshin, but I have been a Vajrayana, or what's called Dzogchen, or the Vajrayana lineage of Buddhism. I've been a student of Dzogchen since 1989, and it is run parallel to the Theravada tradition, and it's really points to the same reality, which can't really even be put in terms of lineage or words or forms, but it did offer a language and a way of resonating with the indescribable part of reality, a language of pointing to it that just I found so beautiful and elegant and fun and fresh and great. And in fact, it's funny that you're even asking me this, because on my computer screen, I have a teaching from a local Dzogchen teacher named Anab Tubten that maybe some of you have practiced with, and I'm sure Eugene has. But this particular practice, he says very simply, you are consciousness and so am I. Mm-hmm. Consciousness is said to be groundless because it has no size, shape, or location. Some people think that consciousness is living in us. However, such a view is very limited in scope, since this consciousness is all pervading. We live in it. We are it. It enjoys eternal play. Now and then consciousness forgets that its play is its own manifestation and gets lost in believing that it is separate from itself. That forgetfulness is the fundamental delusion that gives birth to all troubles, problems, struggles, and unending chain reactions. Since consciousness itself is not separate from enlightenment, consciousness being aware of itself can happen suddenly and break the chain created by our forgetfulness.
Beautiful.
So simple, so
Beautiful.
elegant.
Yeah. No, it's I have my own, you know, forays into different Buddhist traditions, and both Zen, as you said, although I still feel very, I feel, even though I did very little formal Zen practice, I feel totally influenced by Zen. I think the first Buddhist book I ever read was um, there was a book of Zen stories. I can't remember. Zen
Zen
flesh,
flesh,
Zen bones,
Zen bones. Yeah.
Zen bones. Yeah, and it was like, oh my God, who somebody knows about this stuff, and they were so fun. I also love that, and so I also love Suzuki Roshi because he was so a real person who had a wife and like a real life, and didn't act like he was enlightened, but he was totally enlightened, not acting like he was enlightened. And I just, and also, as you know, my wife practiced and as people know, is also authorized in that school and that tradition, because I met her at when she was a Zen monk in Tassajara. And it was fun to be able to have a romance with a Zen monk. I didn't even know that was possible. You don't do that in the Theravada with the monks. And but also, and Thich Nhat Hanh too has such a big influence on my heart, because he's so heartfelt and so beautiful in dealing with the dukkha of the world that he lived with, and never losing his ground of being who he was and his practice. Um, yeah. And in Tibetan practice too, I feel influenced by people. I've actually met the Dalai Lama a couple times, but just the beauty of his being has had a big impact on me. But I practice with Tsoknyi Rinpoche and with Mingyur, but it's somebody who I never met, but I went to his cave in Bhutan, had a huge impact on me, which is Longchenpa. And Longchenpa is just, and I actually thought about this before, and I pulled out this quote from Longchenpa that is like one of my favorite Buddhist quotes of all time, which is also about awareness. And he said, awareness is always refreshing itself, always newly arriving. You can neither obtain this awareness nor lose it. I mean, it's such a beautiful line. You can't obtain it and you can't lose it. He says, I salute the spontaneously perfect universal creativity, self-refreshing awareness. Universal creativity as the teacher, a direct teaching that you do not need to strive for. I invoke the turning of the wheel of the natural great perfection of spontaneous presence. And I mean, it's like it's it's better than chocolate cake.
It's gorgeous. Absolutely, absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just good food for the soul, every which way.
What's very cool, that you're alluding to also is that we don't have to have met some of these teachers, and their teachings continue to be in some ways through their words, through
Yeah.
the way their words were edited, at least, a
Mhm.
living transmission. And Nisargadatta from the Advaita tradition, where he says, nothing can make you happier than you are.
Mhm.
All search for happiness is misery and leads to more misery. The only happiness worth that name is the natural happiness of being conscious, of conscious being.
Mm.
You know, just little
Yeah,
one-liners, or Thich Nhat Hanh.
yeah.
You who are the richest person on earth, who've
Uh-huh.
been going around begging for a living, stop being the destitute child. Come home, reclaim your heritage. You know, just little the poetry of these guys, it's like a pointing out of your own nature. And if you're listening, you can feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, beautiful, beautiful, both of those, and especially, I'm glad you mentioned Nisargadatta because one of the things I thought we might just mention is like practicing in lineages outside of Buddhism, because technically Nisargadatta was not a Buddhist, although our friend who spent time with him said he was the most enlightened person he ever met, our friend who is Buddhist. And, and so I wonder what other, can you say a little bit about your other lineages, which I know you can?
Well, yeah, well, I have to say that an Advaita Vedanta teacher named H.W. Punja was I would have to say he's the most impactful person that I've ever met, the most awakened person I ever met, and the person who stole my mind more than any other person. And I'm almost inclined to tell you a story of how he stole my mind, a couple little versions of it,
Sure.
if it's not too out there.
Even if it's out there, it can be,
Yeah.
we'll see if it's too out there.
Well, speaking of stepping out of the freedom to step out of our lineage, or whether you're pushed or whether you're just free to, whether it's just part of the creative expression of our lives. I, after I was with U Pandita, I felt, because he was so hard on me, and the way that he was pushing me wasn't so great for my temperament. I needed a little bit more easeful, more spacious, and I started to feel a bit diminished. And just being open to another tradition, I went to see this teacher in India, and I was feeling so much, though, from having practiced a lot, that I wanted, and this was in the middle of my daily life, that I wanted nothing. It wasn't as though I was on a 3-month retreat and going through all the stages of insight and the classic stage of the urge for deliverance, and then all the different things that can happen if you do long practice periods. There's a certain sequence that people go through. I was starting to go through the classic sequences in the middle of my daily life, where I wanted nothing more than to be free. I found everything else a little bit uninteresting. And so in that condition, I went to see this teacher named Punjaji. And when I arrived to see him, he was very jovial, and that was already very welcoming. But he said to me in our first conversation, "Why are you here? Why did you come to see me?" And being a little bit conversant in the language of spirituality, I said to him, "I know that the seeker and the sought, the seeker and what's being sought, are the same. I know that the seeker and the sought are the same, but I've come halfway around the world to see you, so I must want something from you." And he looked at me always with this kind of impish grin on his face, and he said, "Remove the seeker and remove the sought." And that may not sound like much to you, but for me, when I heard those words, remove the seeker and remove the sought, I went completely unconscious. It somehow bypassed my mind that had been calcified as the seeker, looking for something, seeking for something, and I went unconscious. And then what brought me out of being unconscious, the next thing I knew, I heard this deep guttural laughter. And as I came into consciousness, I realized it was coming out of my own mouth. And somehow, so at that moment, somehow my mind just stopped, and it was really quiet for a long time after that.
Mm.
And then it was kind of a matrixy experience, but it was in that little interaction that I saw how the veil of identity that plagues us a lot. And not 2 days later, I had gotten really ill with him. This is the last thing I'll say, and I want to hear one of your stories if you're open to it, since I'm putting myself out there.
No, good.
After that first conversation with him, I got extremely ill, and I was almost delirious with whatever the local thing. It was in Hardwar, India, and it may have been from swimming in the Ganges. And while I was sick, he was sending me chunks of cheese to eat, and there was some little interaction. Finally, I felt well enough to what really felt like dragging my body down a few bridges and then over across the river to the little place that he was meeting with people. And I'll never forget that when I entered the street where Punjaji was living, I bought some bananas that I thought would be soothing on my stomach. And I was very sensitive and still really affected by the illness. And a monkey jumped out of a tree and stole my bananas. And I felt, really it felt so dramatic to me, the whole thing. And I finally dragged my body up to the little kuti where he was living. And he looked at me and he said, how are you feeling? Because he had known that I was ill. He says, how are you feeling? And I said to him, I'm feeling much better, but I'm still sick. And he looked at me again and he said, where is sick? And when he said that, the whole identity of being sick melted away. And then there was this upsurge of vitality. I still had symptoms, but the identity of being sick had vanished. And I realized, oh my Lord, it's so easy when we're not well or something's wrong to adopt a whole view of ourself around it. And ever since that day, it's like my smell test for my own delusion is a little better, and those who I have the good fortune to connect with, I can kind of see when they're a little bit identified with their story of being sick or whatever it might be. So that was life-changing to me.
Beautiful, Howie, every which way. And of course, my favorite part is the monkey.
Yeah, the monkey was right out of central casting.
Oh, right, totally. No, it sounds like Punjaji sent him to take your bananas. Really. Well, it's great to hear. Thank you for sharing it, because it's really beautiful, I believe, for people to hear different ways we can wake up. And the one thing I wonder about what you say was saying you went unconscious. And it really is a wondering, did you go unconscious? Did you have a cessation experience?
Yeah, I had a cessation experience.
Okay.
There was an absence of consciousness, no consciousness of this more conventional reality.
Yeah. Okay. That's important just to clarify for people, because that's something that can also happen after a really long retreat, during that Howie was talking about the progress of insight. You go through these stages and then things cease, right? For however long. And, a moment, or you don't know, because there's no consciousness there, right? It ceases. But also to hear, it can happen like that at any time. Really important, because I know other people, not me, it's happened on retreats, but other people who it happened like that. And really beautiful to hear the the breadth of what it means, of what's possible for consciousness to happen and both not happen.
Mm, right.
So yeah. And you know, and I mean, there's so many different things when I think about other lineages. I have a lot of other lineages, right? Being Jewish is its own lineage for me, and I've really learned so much. And or being in the creative world for so many years and
Mm,
improvising, that taught me so much about how to meditate. Because especially improvisation, you're not thinking about what's going to happen or what happened. It's like now is what's important in improvisation. It's this moment, and you're taking in everything, and also you're not losing what's right here. Boom, and you're just it's coming through you. And also I feel very similar about athletics as being one of my practices.
mm,
And I haven't swum in the Ganges, but I do swim in the bay every other day. And it's a total samadhi practice of being right. There's no place else to be when you get in the cold water. You're not thinking about anything else. Sometimes you're thinking about when the hell am I going to get out of here? But mostly it's just like stroke, 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 and then not even thinking, just it's alive and you're doing it. Um, and of course, you know, I'm also in the diamond approach, so that's a whole nother lineage that has changed my life totally. And in fact, I've had cessation experience on Buddhist retreats that were diamond approach cessation. By that, I mean, I went through that um, what's the word I want? The logos of the diamond approach unfolds in certain ways, just like the logos of the progress of insight. And I went through these stages of going into what they call the absolute in the diamond approach, and the absolute is a precursor to cessation in the diamond approach.
mm,
And it just went, and it just went into all this blackness and peace, which is part of the absolute, peace, stillness, and then I disappeared. And it wasn't me doing anything. And then, and then I came back, and I knew it was good. And that was really a key thing for me, like
mm,
about the deepest realizations. It's good. Even if I don't know why it's good, it doesn't matter. I just know the goodness of it. And that's been a very important part of my practice in general. I don't have to know all the answers about it. When I know it's good, it's beyond my mind thinking it's good. It's more everything knows it's good at that point.
mm. That re-
Anyhow, there's
yeah, I wanted to
please,
just say one more thing about it's good.
yeah.
I think one of the great blessings of being as having my root tradition being the Theravada tradition, the
Mhm.
insight meditation tradition that came out of the Theravada, is that its whole basis is harmlessness,
Mhm.
is non-harming, is ethical conduct, is do no harm, and as a community, that basis has been so prevalent that I think it's it's created so much safety, and the goodness of that I think has been knowing so many other traditions where there's so many problems, and
Right,
where sila or shila or whatever, that ethical conduct is not the basis, is not
right.
the most
Yeah.
important thing as a foundation. It really, you can really tell when it's not. So
Totally. And
um,
my first tradition pre-Buddhism was a guru who was kind of a new age Western guru known as Atmananda, who later changed his name to Zen Master Rama.
yes.
Yeah, Rama. And I mean, and it was great to be with him, and I learned a tremendous amount in 1 year because you just saw, oh, consciousness could go anywhere like that. And it was wild, and I liked it. But Sila, he didn't have it. and it was really great that he kicked me out of his group after a year because I wasn't devoted enough to him in the ways he wanted people to be devoted, and it wasn't the right thing for me. So